I told Mom I was excited for my sister's wedding tomorrow. She said it was last week. I stood in my parents' kitchen that Friday morning, holding a pale pink wedding invitation in my hand, my chest practically vibrating with excitement. The morning sunlight streamed through the bay windows overlooking their backyard in suburban Connecticut, and I could practically smell the success of everything I'd been working toward. My sister Natalie's big day was supposed to be tomorrow, Saturday, October 12th. I had my dress pressed and hanging in my car, her maid of honor speech already memorized, and I'd even convinced my boss to let me take an extra day off work. I'd helped Natalie plan this wedding for months. I'd contributed money toward the catering, the flowers, the music. I'd been there for every vendor meeting, every dress fitting, every late-night panic attack about centerpieces. "Mom," I said, my voice bright and cheerful, "I can't believe it's finally tomorrow. I'm so nervous about the speech, but in a good way, you know? The kind of nervous that means you really care." But instead of smiling back at me the way mothers are supposed to, my mom froze. The ceramic spoon she'd been stirring her morning coffee with clattered into her white porcelain mug with a sound like breaking glass. Time seemed to slow down. I watched her face shift, watched the color drain from her cheeks like someone pulling a plug on a bathtub. "Victoria," she said quietly, her voice careful and measured in a way that made my stomach drop. She wasn't meeting my eyes. She was looking past me, toward the refrigerator, toward the window, anywhere but at me. The wedding was last week. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The words didn't connect in my brain the way words are supposed to. They just hung in the air between us like a foreign language I'd never studied. I laughed, actually laughed, because this had to be some kind of joke. Some weird, dark joke that Mom had never made before in her entire life. "What?" I said, my laugh sounding nervous even to my own ears. "No, that doesn't make sense. It says right here, Saturday, October 12th. Look, Mom. Right here on the invitation." I held up the pale pink card, the one with the elegant gold lettering and the picture of Natalie and her fiancé Tom smiling in their engagement photo. But Mom wasn't looking at the card. She was staring at her coffee like it held the answer to the hardest question in the world. "The date was changed," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We must have sent you the wrong one." Her words hit me like ice water down my spine. My smile didn't just falter, it froze on my face. The truth began sinking in, slowly at first, then all at once like a sudden undertow. They hadn't made a simple mistake. They hadn't accidentally grabbed an old invitation from the printer. This wasn't about miscommunication or a clerical error. They'd excluded me. On purpose, and somehow, that was only the beginning of what I was about to discover. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 30 seconds. The silence between us was so thick you could have cut it with one of the kitchen knives hanging on the magnetic strip above the counter. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking on the wall, a bird chirping outside in the garden. Everything suddenly seemed too loud. "So, everyone knew?" I asked quietly, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "Everyone except me?" Mom didn't answer right away. I watched as her eyes darted toward the window, then the door, then back down to her coffee. She was doing that thing she always did when she was uncomfortable, avoiding me like I was contagious. I placed the invitation carefully on the granite countertop, my hands actually trembling. This detail mattered. The trembling meant this was real. This was happening. "You sent the wrong date to me," I said, working it out as I spoke. "Just me. And everyone else got the real one." Mom's lips tightened into a thin line. She took a long sip of her coffee, and I could see her hands were shaking too. That's when I knew I was right. That's when the real fear started. "It was Natalie's decision," Mom said finally, the words coming out like she'd rehearsed them 1,000 times. "She thought it'd be best if things stayed peaceful." Peaceful. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. I felt my jaw clench. Peaceful? After everything I've done for this family? For her? My throat burned with the beginning of tears, but I forced my voice to stay controlled and calm, even though inside I was fragmenting like glass. "Peaceful from what, Mom? From me showing up? From me being there?" Her shoulders sagged like I'd physically pushed them down. "You know how Natalie gets around you," she said, and now her voice had that apologetic tone that somehow made it worse. "You've always made her feel small." I stared at her in absolute disbelief. Small? I'd spent literal years supporting Natalie financially, emotionally, practically holding her hand through every crisis. And now they were trying to paint me as the villain in the story? I was supposed to be the problem. The one who made everyone uncomfortable? "That's not fair," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to control it. But Mom just looked away. I left the house before the tears could fall. Before I could say something I'd regret. Before I could completely unravel in my mother's kitchen on a Friday morning that was supposed to be the beginning of a celebration. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed in my small apartment in Hartford, staring at the invitation under the lamplight. The delicate gold lettering seemed to mock me with each swirl and curve. Victoria isn't invited. Victoria isn't welcome. Victoria doesn't matter. Each letter spelled out my humiliation in a language only I could read. Natalie had always been Mom and Dad's favorite. The gentle one. The dreamer. The special one. I was the practical daughter. The one who figured things out. The one who paid for things. The one who fixed problems and made hard decisions and never asked for anything in return. 3 years ago, when Natalie's event planning business collapsed under a pile of debt she couldn't explain, she came to my apartment at midnight, crying so hard she could barely speak. "Vic, I'll lose everything," she'd sobbed into my shoulder. "The bank is calling. The investors are threatening legal action. I've never felt so small. Please help me. You're the only one who understands numbers." I'd sat with her all night. I'd pulled up spreadsheets. I'd called lawyers. And I'd drained half my savings, nearly $40,000, to bail her out. She promised to repay me every single cent. She never did. We never mentioned it again, and I'd learned to live with that silence. Then last year, when Dad needed emergency bypass surgery and their insurance had lapsed during some billing issue, who do you think footed the hospital bills? Who sat in the payment office and signed all the papers? Me. I wrote a check for $18,000 without hesitation. I thought helping family meant something. I thought that's what love looked like. Apparently, I was wrong about everything. Later that night, around 11 o'clock, when I was starting to think I'd never sleep again, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Claire, my cousin from my dad's side, someone who'd always quietly seen through the family's dysfunction and favoritism. Someone who'd actually been at the wedding. "Call me when you can," her text read. "I need to tell you something." I called her immediately. "Victoria, I just need to say this before it eats me alive," Claire said softly when she picked up. "They didn't make a mistake with that date. Emily told everyone, and I mean everyone, that she didn't want you there. She said your career, your confidence, your whole presence would overshadow her wedding. She wanted her day to be about her, not about how successful you've become." My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might actually be sick. "Wait, Natalie said that?" I whispered. "Out loud? To people?" "To everyone, Vic. Your mom backed her up too. Said it was her day and you should respect that. That asking you to miss it was a reasonable boundary." I bit down so hard I tasted blood. "So they planned this," I said, not really asking. "They sat down and decided to lie to me." "I'm so sorry," Claire said, and I could hear the guilt in her voice. "I wanted to tell you immediately, but Natalie made everyone promise not to say anything. I can't believe they actually went through with it." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my apartment for hours. They'd plotted this together. My mother and my sister had actively decided that I was the problem. That my existence at the wedding would ruin it. That keeping me away was the only way to ensure Natalie's special day remained unspoiled. The humiliation was one thing, but the deliberate, calculated nature of it, that's what broke something inside me. They hadn't made a mistake. They hadn't acted in the heat of the moment. They'd chosen this. Chosen to exclude me. Chosen to lie to my face. I felt something shift in my chest. Not rage exactly, but resolve. A clarity that felt almost dangerous. If they wanted me erased from their perfect picture, I would make sure they understood exactly what that meant. They'd built their comfortable lives on the foundation of my sacrifice, and they'd repaid me with public humiliation. Well, I was about to show them what it actually felt like to lose me. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up with a clear head and a plan. I opened my laptop at 6 in the morning, while the sun was still just a promise on the horizon, and I started pulling up my financial records. Every account, every investment, every commitment I'd made to this family over the past decade. What I found was staggering. Over the years, I'd helped them more than they'd probably even realized. More than I'd even fully realized until I started adding it all up. My parents' mortgage? When their credit took a hit during the 2008 financial crisis, I'd helped them refinance through my name. They'd been paying me back gradually, but I was still on the deed. Emily's failed business loan? I'd co-signed that, which meant if she defaulted, it fell on me. And the family shared investment fund that we'd started together in 1995? I was the only one who'd been consistently contributing to it for the past 7 years. When my parents needed money for medical expenses or when my sister needed an emergency loan, that fund had been their safety net. My safety net, really. They thought they could humiliate me without any consequence. They'd forgotten the most important thing. I held the financial strings. I called my financial advisor, Robert, at 8 in the morning. His secretary was surprised to hear from me requesting an emergency meeting, but Robert fit me in at 2 that afternoon. I printed out every document, every statement, every agreement. I organized it chronologically and by account type. I was going to be prepared for this. At his office in downtown Hartford, I slid the files across Robert's mahogany desk with careful precision. "Robert," I said, my voice steady in a way I didn't quite feel, "I need you to help me separate all joint accounts, freeze all co-signed obligations, and transfer all remaining funds back under my name only. I also need you to review what my liability is going forward." He raised an eyebrow over his reading glasses. Robert had been managing my money for 5 years, ever since I'd gotten serious about my financial future. He'd seen me build wealth carefully and deliberately. He'd never heard me ask for something like this. "Are you sure?" he asked carefully. "These are major financial decisions. Especially with your parents." "Completely sure," I said, cutting him off. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded and got to work. By the end of the meeting, we'd drafted letters to every institution. We'd identified which accounts could be separated immediately and which would require more time. We'd calculated my remaining liability. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about freedom. Freedom from the burden of carrying people who didn't appreciate it. Freedom from being a walking wallet. Freedom from the guilt they'd weaponized against me for so long. As I drove home that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. 2 days later, I drove to my parents' house in Stamford. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of perfect fall day that felt like nature was mocking me with its beauty. I could see the leaves turning gold and red, the pumpkins decorating neighborhood porches, the general aura of everything being fine and normal when my entire world had shifted. I wasn't there to yell. I wasn't there to cry or plead or try to make them understand how much they'd hurt me. I was there to make things clear. To draw a line. Natalie was sitting in the living room when I arrived, flipping through her wedding photos in an album. She was laughing at something, probably some moment I'd helped arrange, but hadn't gotten to witness. Mom and Dad were on the couch, wine glasses in hand at 11 in the morning, pretending everything was normal. Pretending their daughter hadn't just discovered their betrayal. Pretending we were still the close-knit family we'd always claimed to be. I stood in the doorway, not moving forward, not moving back. I let them see me. I let that silence build. "Nice pictures," I said flatly. Natalie froze. Her smile faded like someone turning down the volume on a radio. Mom's face went pale. Dad looked up and then immediately looked away, which somehow hurt worse than if he'd said something. "You didn't miss me?" I asked quietly. Victoria, Mom began, standing up like that would help somehow, but I raised a hand to stop her. "Save it," I said. "I know everything." Claire told me. She felt guilty for lying to me, so she told me the truth. The real truth. Natalie's face twisted. I could see the moment she realized she'd been caught. "Oh, please," she said, her voice sharp and defensive. "It was my wedding. I didn't want you making it about you." I almost laughed. "Almost. About me?" "Natalie, the only reason you could afford that wedding in the first place was because of me. That dress you wore? The one you looked so beautiful in? I helped pay for that. The venue you chose? My money helped book it. The band, the flowers, the photographer, all of it was possible because I've been bankrolling your life for years. And you didn't even have the decency to tell me you were excluding me." Dad looked away completely now, his jaw tight. Mom said nothing, but I could see her eyes filling with tears. "Good. Every choice I made," I continued, my voice steady and cold in a way I'd never heard from myself before, "was about family. When you needed help, I was there. When Dad needed surgery, I paid for it without blinking. When your business was failing, I saved you. I did it because I thought we were a family. I thought that's what family meant." Victoria, Mom tried again. "No," I said. "It's my turn to talk." I stepped closer into the living room, and I could see them all tense up. Even Natalie seemed to shrink back a little, which was interesting considering she was the one who'd orchestrated my exclusion. "Well," I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out a thick envelope, "consider this your last handout." I set the envelope on the coffee table in front of them. Inside were documents, formal account closures, loan transfers, and official notices of withdrawal from every single shared financial tie I had with them. Each document was notarized. Each one was legal and binding. Natalie blinked, looking confused. "What is this?" "Freedom," I said. "For all of us. You wanted me out of your life? You've got it. Now you get to find out what that actually costs." I turned around and walked out of the house. I didn't wait for their response. I didn't need to hear it. A week later, the consequences began to ripple like shockwaves through my family in ways I'd almost anticipated, but somehow still couldn't quite believe were actually happening. Mom called on a Wednesday evening, her voice cracking on the phone. "Victoria, your father, and I can't make the mortgage this month," she said, and I could hear genuine panic underneath her words. "We need to talk about what you did. We need to figure this out." I'd known this was coming. When I'd refinanced their mortgage through my name years ago, I'd become the primary account holder, even though they made the payments. Now that I'd removed myself from the account and transferred it back to them alone, their credit score had tanked. The bank had reevaluated their loan. The interest rate had jumped. They couldn't afford it. "You'll figure it out," I said coolly, not unkindly, just matter of fact. "You always said you didn't need me anyway. So this should be easy." "Victoria, please," Mom begged. "We're your parents. We love you." I hung up. Natalie texted next, about 4 days after that, her messages escalating from confused to panicked. The bank called, her text read. They transferred the business loan. I can't make the payments without I didn't finish reading it. When I'd co-signed her business loan 7 years ago, I'd done it as a safety net. I genuinely wanted to help her dream succeed. But I'd also been legally responsible for every penny. Now that I'd worked with Robert to formally remove myself from that obligation, the bank had transferred the loan directly to Natalie. Without my co-signature backing her up, the interest rate had doubled. She couldn't make the payments. Her follow-up text was more desperate. "Can we call? I need to talk to you about this. I'm scared. Please." I turned off the notifications for her texts. Dad didn't call or text. He just disappeared into the silence he'd been practicing his whole life whenever things got difficult. That hurt in a different way, not because it was unexpected, but because it confirmed everything I'd come to understand about my family. They loved me when I was useful, when I was convenient. But when I actually mattered on my own terms, they were nowhere to be found. It wasn't cruelty, I told myself. It wasn't revenge. It was closure. They had treated me like a backup plan, a walking wallet, an emotional support animal. They'd mistaken my kindness for weakness, and they'd learned too late that those are not the same things. I had spent years pouring from a cup I wasn't filling for myself, and nobody had even noticed that the cup was empty. Now they were learning what it felt like to run dry. But the interesting thing was, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I just felt tired. And, oddly, a little bit free. Months later, I stood in my new home on the coast of Connecticut, watching the sun set over the Atlantic Ocean. The soft crash of waves replaced the noise of family guilt, family obligation, family manipulation that had been the soundtrack of my entire life. This house was mine. I'd bought it with money I'd earned, saved, and protected. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a private beach. It had a home office with a view that made me want to wake up in the morning. It had no ghosts in it. I'd built this life myself, no handouts, no shared accounts, no apologies I felt obligated to chase. Claire visited one evening with a bottle of wine and the kind of concern that comes from someone who actually sees you. We sat on my deck as the sun turned the sky every shade of purple and orange. "You did the right thing," she said, handing me a glass of wine. "I hope you know that." "Even though I know it doesn't feel that way." "They're still struggling?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "They're still trying to figure out how to live without your help," Claire confirmed. "Your mom took a part-time job at a yoga studio. Your sister's business is on probation with the bank. Your dad finally found out about the mortgage situation, and apparently he and your mom had their biggest fight in years." I sipped my wine and looked out at the ocean. "Maybe that's their lesson," I said finally. "About what?" "About what happens when you treat love like it's infinite. When you mistake loyalty for servitude. When you believe you're entitled to someone's sacrifice." I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't planning any more strategies or waiting for apologies that would never come. I was just free. 3 months after that conversation with Claire, I sent Natalie a small card. Nothing dramatic. Nothing mean-spirited. It arrived on her first wedding anniversary, a date I'm sure she wasn't expecting to hear from me on. Inside the card was a blank note and a check. For $1. On the memo line, in careful handwriting, I wrote, "For your Independence Fund." It wasn't spite. It wasn't cruelty. It was a reminder. A reminder of what I'd learned the hard way. A reminder of what happens when you mistake loyalty for weakness. A reminder that the most powerful thing someone can do is walk away from people who take them for granted. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn love from people who loved me conditionally. Who loved me when I was useful. Who loved me when I was performing the role they'd written for me. Now, I was learning to love myself in exactly that unconditional way. And standing on my deck, watching the waves roll in and out with that perfect rhythm that doesn't require anything from anyone, I realized that was worth far more than any wedding invitation, any family obligation, any shared bank account could ever be. I was finally home.